Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you, Noah and Gabe and Steve, for having me here, and especially for giving me the faith that I can pull in the talk right after lunch, because that's usually the hardest spot. So glad to be here and talking about the future of narrative and immersive environments. Yes, I am at Refinery29 right now, but to give you some context of where I'm coming from for this talk, here's a little bit of background on me. My first interactive immersive environments were at SIGGRAPH in '99. Yeah, way back when. Nobody knew what we were doing. And then I was lucky enough to work with Disney Imagineering, with the Disney Creative Entertainment, with Hong Kong Disneyland. I consider theme parks very much immersive environments. And as VR came back into being consumer viable, I jumped back into working in immersive tech. So I produced the first feature film that was out on the Oculus Rift DK2. I was lucky enough to be invited by Obama to film his historic speech in Kenya in 360, the first time we had a president in 360. And have had various projects that I've worked on through the years that have premiered at Tribeca, Future of Storytelling, the World Immersion Forum in Brussels. I've also worked on the academic side. So I worked with Ken Perlin's research group at NYU, the Future Realities Lab, on HoloGem and Wonderland, if you saw that at Future of Storytelling, where we had multiple actors and multiple audience members, all in headsets, in a virtual environment, in a virtual world. So it was the first time that we had done that. And led the research group on blended reality in Yale University last year, kind of exploring embodied navigation in virtual environments. So, and now Refinery29. So my breadth is very wide, and that's where I kind of want to take everybody now. It's like, I've seen some great presentations where we're drilling down into the specifics of what's working, what's not working, but maybe let's back it up and look a little bit more theoretical. But first, everybody's favorite, 29 rooms. Yes. So for those who don't know 29 Rooms, it's our creative fun house, our immersive world of culture and creativity. It has since expanded. We have a new deal with IMG now where we're going to be going global. And yes, so when you're dreaming small, the 29 Rooms started as just an idea, and it grew. And I think when you have a passion and you're connecting art and creativity, it can grow into something bigger. So if everybody who's working on some of the smaller stuff, keep dreaming big. It starts small. Right now, it's projected to have reached over half of all Instagram users worldwide. It's incredible. And these are spectacular works of interactive art, but each space has a story and a reason. These spaces and these stories, though, they're different. They're different than traditional narratives. They have to be, because this isn't your typical film or your typical theater piece. This is truly a different mindset, which is what I want to dive into a little bit deeper today. So we'll start. I know it's a conversation. We'll start looking at what the storytelling problem is. Right, so you thought we were going to talk about the future of narrative, right? Yeah, no. I'm pretty sure this is what my parents thought my career was going to look like when I told them I was going to go study directing at Carnegie Mellon. But I love old abandoned spaces, but I do have this up here for a specific reason. Just taking a look at this. This is a place where storytelling happens. Does anything, and we'll make this interactive, feel free to shout out, but there's one very important thing in here that creates like a classical medium, a storytelling medium. Any ideas on what that is? The stage, right? Where this proscenium right here, the space between the audience and the content. And this framed medium is something that we see every day. We know to look for the frame for our content. right? And I know that we know this as immersive creators, but it's so pervasive in our world, in our laptops, in our phones, in the menus, in our screens, that breaking out of this mindset, it's hard to do. And it's not just words, it's truly a matter of how you're perceiving it. And our tendency, I think, as whether you come from film or theater, is to take this process of storytelling and have an audience member and put it on their head. We're good, right? We're good. We're taking this process and applying it to an environmental circumstance. But in immersive mediums, that doesn't work. That's trying to tell a story. And I think if you want to tell a story, go find a frame. But if you want to create in an immersive environment, an immersive experience, understanding the fundamental differences between like immersive mediums and classical mediums is incredibly important. And learn them, embrace them, pursue them. So like generally, what are we talking about? High level, we've got our storytelling process, right? Where our author comes in, constructs the narrative. Whether you're game design, whether you're immersive, spatial, like there's an authorship that happens here. And then that constructed authorship goes into a medium, our archaic theater here, which contains the narrative, right? And then we put that out to an audience that witnesses that narrative, right? So that's kind of our process. So what happens when we go into immersive land, right? It moves, it changes, it's got, instead of this passive audience receiving information, we've got, there's no frame in here, they're moving around. And again, we know this, but I'm just reiterating it because I think it's important to take a step back and say, okay, if we aren't telling stories, then what are we doing? Right? What are we doing? We're telling immersive stories, we're interactive stories. What exactly is this? So I'm gonna throw this out here. I'm gonna throw out this idea of what I call the Story Plex. And a Story Plex is a dynamic network of narrative elements, of technology, and of human psychology. It's fluid, it moves. You have a space, and in that space, there are these three core elements that are part of your toolbox. You have your narrative elements. These are still your Aristotelian poetics. You've got plot, you've got character, you've spectacle, the things that construct a narrative. But how those pieces come together through the technology that you're using is going to be different than it is in a traditional classical medium, right? Technology doesn't have to be virtual reality or mixed reality, right? It can be the lighting of the stage, directing focus through lighting. It can be the UI in a game or any kind of location-based environment, how you're moving, flowing people through the space. Those can all be tools, right? And then how those come together and interact together is dependent on human psychology. So these are the social constructs that are already in place from the moment that people walk into a space. I like to think of early, like when you go to the theater and you walk into a theater, like you don't go in there and like the theater's already happening, right? And the show's already going. The lights dim, you turn your cell phones off, you unwrap your candy. Like we have social agreements that are in place that are part of story and part of how we interact with story we're still human after all. We're not gonna abandon those, so. Remember the picture of the theater, the old abandoned theater? So while I was at Carnegie Mellon studying directing, I also picked up another major in computer science, specifically in human-computer interaction, which is a very cool study, and especially for immersive environments. If you're not familiar with human-computer interaction, it integrates design, technology and coding, and human psychology, and how those all interact and work together in order to optimize an experience, to reduce errors, to create a system that works fluidly. And I feel like working in a Story Plex and working in immersive environments, that type of study, looking into human-computer interaction, can be a really useful tool. There's one book called The Design of Everyday Things, which is particularly phenomenal. So, Story Plex toolbox. All right. Is everybody with me? Yes. All right. Okay, not falling asleep after lunch, great. So, what's the difference between the early story, like the classical meanings of storytelling, and working in this Story Plex? So, here's some of the ways that I like to think of working differently. In the square mentality, which is like your classical mediums, you have a frame. It generally starts with some kind of audio-visual cue. You're writing down your story. You're thinking of that first shot, that first moment when people come in, and what does that relay? What kind of story does that relay? So it starts with that audio-visual experience. Generally passive. All right, I know we've got a lot of interactive people here. But when we think of audience, and even using the term audience, it implies a passive nature. Linear. And by linear, I mean prescripted. I know that there are many types of linear. There are branching narratives. There are different types of constructs. That is still all prescripted and predetermined before you get into it being put in front of an audience, right? Turn to page 76. 76 has already been written. And there's a director that is generally directing that framed medium that is going to be put in front of our audience. So if that's the square mentality, and we think of the sphere mentality that we're going to be working in, which is not just putting a frame on somebody's head, what would be the comparative between the frame? What would be the spherical alternative? What are you building? A world. Yes, somebody over there said a world, right? You're working in a world. And when I think of world, I don't just think of like, oh, okay, that's, it's an environment. Like, our world is made up of physics. It's made up of rules. It's made up of everything that works for us that we can play with in an immersive environment. So the world and the rules in it, right? High level. So if it's not audio-visual, if we're not starting with the audio-visual side of things, what are we starting with an immersive narrative? What's that? Every sense. Sorry, I can't hear.
All the five senses.
Your senses, right? Your senses. And I think the key thing being like, your senses is in the guest who's in the space, right? It's psychological. Right? The way that you're interacting with the space goes back to the psychology, this human psychology, rather than what is the story that I'm trying to tell? Yes, that informs it, but how that gets experienced and the psychology of it is where I like to start as an immersive creator. Instead of passive, I could have asked this one too, but agency, right? That autonomy, that ability to interact and to respond, and for the world to respond to you. Now we're getting into a different kind of story. And instead of linear, I think I've said it a couple of times, we're in a dynamic environment, an environment that's responding to you, a world that is aware that you're there, and I think there was somebody in the Oculus studio that called it the Swayze effect, right? And from the movie Ghost, where if the world isn't responding to you, it's like, am I even here, But having this dynamic, responsive environment in a spherical mentality. And if we aren't directing, what are we doing? We've got our world. What are we doing in our world? What's that? Participating. I like participants. Participants is one of my words that I really like as well for context. Living. But if you're the director, if you would be in a classical medium, the director of a film or of a theater piece, what would you be in an immersive narrative? Creator, yeah, you're creating. Because guess what? You can put the pieces in play, but there's free will involved. You are not directing what's gonna happen. So think of yourself as a creator. I encourage people to use this language to contextualize how they're approaching immersive narratives, because it makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference in the way that you're thinking about creating. It makes a huge difference in where the immersive narratives can go to. Because I think in the square mentality, in the left side you can kind of see this square mentality, which we're all pretty familiar with, Freytag's pyramid, the one-act structure, a 5-act structure, not one-act structure, it just looks like one big. But in the spherical mentality, if I can get this to play, it's kind of like, I think of it as like seeing the Matrix. Like you move away from a linear structure and you move into, if this was moving, and you can imagine it moving, you know, a fractal environment that is nodal. It's like it works together as a piece and as a whole, but it's dynamic and it's responsive, it's self-aware, and it creates it will create the immersive narrative of the future. Now we're still a pretty long ways away from that, so. All right, so bridging the narrative gap, right? So if we're not storytellers and we are more creators and architects of systems, I think, and I truly believe that like the future of narrative and immersive environments is going to involve working with AI and working with systems that are dynamically responsive and generative. But I also think that that's quite a long ways off. So for all of its technological promises, AI like as a narrative tool in immersive tech right now is still a significant challenge until we all go see Star Wars opening up later this year, and then we see what happens there. But I do think that where we are right now with immersive environments is kind of a sweet spot, where we can have experiential AI and leverage what the experiential world is good at with what AI is good at to really start pushing the boundaries of immersive narratives. So leveraging the IRL components of experiential, like real world physics, human dynamics, interactive environments, and still exploring AI with like a human moderated experience and kind of taking the load off of building like a very data complex environments and structures can allow for us to start playing around in this Story Plex that I see is where we're headed. So there have been a lot of developers that are already working in this area with great success. Does everybody remember Tay? Right? Tay, the AI chatterbot on Twitter that Microsoft had to take down for like just going raging because it didn't know how to control itself and keep itself in check. But I mean, this is something that's more recent, but if you go back to like the Oz project, which was done about 25 years before Tay, this is a group that was researching artificial intelligence and pushing the concepts of believable agents. So again, the entire environment and building out the entire environment can be very heavy, but if you're focusing on just how do we get agents in spaces to be believable, then you start to make progress with narratives and how we interact with stories. So these are little things called woggles. You guys can see my notes here. Let me make it bigger. There's like a blue one and a purple one right there. And they were controlled by a personality. Like they had a personality that was written for them. So they had things like goals, success, failure, prospective failure, and other things that would make the characters respond with happiness or fear or gratitude. And just looking at how creating believable agents and us interacting with believable agents. Like if you think about immersive theater in your game rooms, we struggle with, all right, I heard somebody say earlier today, you know, how do we get our audience to believe in the characters and interact with them as real characters? Like this work is being done also on the computer science side, and I encourage everybody to, you know, take a look at the Oz project, and also a quick shout out to the team that is talking next door, Samantha, Tender Claws, for some of their work that they're doing in believable agents that they did with Tinder, a virtual pet that kind of would respond to laughter and surprise and learn tricks in augmented reality. So again, looking at these little bits that provide narrative and narrative components, right? Character. One of the Aristotelian poetics of character. How do you create a believable agent? Like, we've been trying to do that on the theater and on the stage for centuries, right? Like, now we're trying to say, okay, we're trying to codify it then, but how do we codify it now in a computer language or in a virtual interaction? So there are parallels and similarities here. One of the other cool projects that I think is really kind of leading the way in where it's heading is Frankenstein Ai, if anybody had the chance to check that out. Where this is actually a team out of Columbia University's Digital Storytelling Lab. And they stage like they're now staging these immersive dinner parties. They kind of mix storytelling, conversation with AI. Storytelling's their word, I would never say that. But one of the things I thought was really interesting about Frankenstein AI was one of the machine learning developers, was saying that AI will fail in ways that are unintuitive to humans and succeed in ways that are unintuitive to humans. So the developer said basically this particular algorithm had two jobs. One of them was to do a sentiment analysis of the participant inputs, like the people that are interacting, and say, okay, how are these registering? What does this register? How does the system use that as data? And the other one was to react to those inputs by reflecting an emotional state, which I think is kind of interesting because it goes back to that Story Plex idea of, okay, we've got our input, right? Our elements are human psychology elements, and then we've got our output, which is our narrative elements, like that construct that narrative. And it's all put together through this particular tool, this particular algorithm that they're developing. So that they developed for this project. So, sorry, just to back up, in case anybody doesn't know Frankenstein AI, it had live interaction, like live characters and performers in a space, and they would guide participants through steps that an AI system would then also collect the data and respond. So it was that hybrid again, this experiential AI hybrid that is our kind of steps towards the future of immersive narrative. So as kind of the XR industries, or cross-realities industries, are grappling with hardware systems and all kinds of UI standardizations and creating meaningful content in an environment that isn't putting a frame on somebody's head, and the IRL experiences are kind of struggling to tell spatial stories with more complex, multidimensional narratives. Right now, like to make this relevant, this little talk right here, relevant to right now, this experiential AI is a sweet spot. We can be moving this guest experience forward by letting computers kind of do what they do best with AI systems and letting the real world do what it does best with human reasoning and physical, environmental physics and things along those lines. So if we're looking at the potential of, or the future of immersive narratives, I'm pretty excited about this spot. In general, though, I encourage everybody the next time you use the word storytelling, the next time you're thinking about an interactive storytelling or something along those lines, just to double check yourself and say, is this really what I'm trying to do? Is this really what I'm trying to create? Is this really does that really encapsulate what is here? I think we all agree that we need a new language and that there needs to be a consistent vocabulary in what it is. But we also don't make photo plays anymore, do we? We go to the cinema. Like this language is going to evolve, and let's all be a part of what that is. So totally shameless plug here. That over the last 20 years or so, while I've been working in VR and AR, location-based entertainment, game design, software design, theater, film, television, I obviously cannot seem to decide what I want to do other than to create stories and narratives that are powerful and connect with people. I have put together a collection of, I think it's just a collection of these in a book. And it's going to come out during Tribeca Immersive if anybody's going to be there. But for right now, it's called The End of Storytelling, which to me encapsulates this talk, which is the future of something is, something has to end in something in order for something to create. And it can be a scary place, right? Christopher Columbus sailed to the edge of the earth and was gonna fall off, you know, oh my gosh, what's he doing? There's monsters out there. But you know, that's where the gods live too, right? That's where the amazing things that we haven't discovered yet are. So maybe if mentally we think about the end of storytelling, we can consider what the future of immersive narrative can be. So I wanted to leave some extra time for questions and for people to ask anything that they have on these kind of high-level crazy ideas. So, yeah. Yes. Hi.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about how you define the difference between narrative and story?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I think that's an awesome question. So, to me, I consider story being elements and pieces of elements. So if you're thinking like Joseph Campbell, right? You have your different elements, or you think about your Aristotelian poetics and you've got your building blocks of story. And I consider that to be like the 5% of narrative. And narrative is how we as humans, that's human psychology part, take those story building blocks and create a narrative in our mind, right? And I know that they're used pretty interchangeably, and some people can argue that that's a different way of looking at it, but the way that I think about it is story is the building blocks that we take, and then we put those pieces there, and then the human experience of that story creates the narrative.
Narrative output, what ends up registering with the audience.
Right. The narrative is, because we all create our own narrative, right? You're walking down the street and there's somebody walking right behind you, like if it's in your own neighborhood, maybe it's a friend, or if you're in a scary place, maybe it's something like, the fact is there's just somebody walking down behind you. Those are like the story elements walking along. The narrative is how you're constructing that to be, yeah. Okay, does anybody think I'm totally crazy? Anybody? Okay, I saw this hand up here first.
As far as a company you work with right now, as far as like experiential creative, right?
Beyond 29 rooms, what are some?
Yeah.
Beyond 29 rooms, what else is something that you guys are sort of reaching forward to in this future of storytelling, as far as like these installations or build-outs, these brand partnerships that you see are seeking from brands to you guys as creative leads to integrate and invigorate sort of the creative process in the work?
Yes, no, great question. Refinery29 with 29 rooms, that in and of itself is looking to move and scale with IMG. Now there's going to be a new tentpole that's coming up in September that we're looking to push the boundaries a little bit more. I'm not really free to talk about what it is yet, but we are looking at reconceptualizing what is a room, right? Which has been very literal up till now, but pushing towards how do we have a great guest experience as well as support the brands that support us, which is obviously critical in being able to build anything that we want to do. We want to make sure that our partners are happy with what they're getting, and ultimately, honestly, that comes back to that 1 billion impressions number, right? Like they're looking for exposure and context and that cool factor that Refinery29 does so well. And how it plays out on social is a big part of how we work towards solutions of what's next.
And what's the kind of the relationship between like your sort of role and that of the brand and what they can kind of speak to as far as like the overall experience and what you guys sort of tailor and create for their brand?
Yes. So the question is, how much does a brand, I believe, influence like what the creative? And I think Refinery29 is in a really great position because we were successful doing it early on, and the companies that we work with trust us. They trust us creatively. So while they come to us and say, we want to be a part of this, They give us guidelines and brands that they work with, and then we take that creatively and we own the creative. Like, we very much put it on ourselves and our creative team to think bigger and think, how do we represent this in a beautiful and exciting and meaningful way? I mean, it's very important for us to have a meaningful relationship with the people that come through 29 Rooms. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Really excited about the new concepts and terminology you're introducing. But also think about, I know we're in a room full of innovators here.
Yeah.
But also think about the history of storytelling, and, the early function of storytelling was to carry knowledge forward for humans, and it was very scarce, and we carried with abundance.
Totally.
And so we explored quite a bit. And I'm just curious, I'm curious about your title. Do you really believe it's the end of storytelling? Is there certain functions of telling a story, having a storyteller rather than having a world to explore? Right?
Yeah. No, I had gotten some serious debates at Yale about this. The end of storytelling is not ceasing to exist, right? Theater is not going to cease to exist. Film doesn't cease to exist. What I'm trying to encourage here in this room of incredibly bright, incredibly unique perspectives is to say, okay, let's challenge ourselves. Let's challenge ourselves to not use the word storytelling, to think not like cavemen have for, now we're gonna draw this on the wall and bear eat you if you go down here. Let's think about this a little bit differently. And write to me and tell me what you're thinking. I love to debate this, but it's meant more as a conceptual challenge. Yeah. Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about Experiential AI? I know that you said that it's going to evolve. Sorry. It's going to evolve in ways that nobody really expects. But could you explain a little bit more about how it's going to be employed in be played out?
Yes. Let's see. Probably an actual example would be most useful here. I think again that the Frankenstein AI, or when you have an environment, right, and you have an environment that has live actors and has live actors that can move people through a space and through an experience, but let's say the environment itself is controlled through data points that it receives from the guests that are in the space, right? So you have, and this is a project I was working on with some incredibly smart people. Rob Otten is here from Hexagram, who has a backend called Saga. And that allows for the creative input to kind of be put together with a narrative focus, so that you're using real world actors to do the heavy lifting and to create that meaningful engagement. But the surprise and delight and the narrative can be responsively generated based on the information that happens at the time. So no two stories are the same, but you're also not pre-scripting it, right? Which is like your branching narrative style, where you've got, okay, does she turn left or does she turn right? That to me is still linear prescripted. And what I'm thinking is when you have a back-end system that can truly generate a virtual character or things to happen in a space that aren't prescripted but are truly coming from the interactions within that space, then you have something that I'm calling Experiential AI. Yeah. In the very back. Hi.
It's weird because I kind of had a knee-jerk reaction initially to this, because I almost feel like a story could be the collection of narratives that come out from the audience. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like by taking the storyteller out of it, mm-hmm. I feel like there's a lot of people who would be missing the thought that there is a story to learn here. So I think a lot of people like to know that there is a storyteller, and somebody put the thought into it for me to discover that story.
Oh, there still is authorship. I definitely think so. I mean, you still have, ultimately AI is only a set of data, right? An interpretation of a set of data. Somebody is setting up the rules of that world, right? Which again goes back to being called a creator. You're setting up the rules of the world as opposed to the strict story lines that go through. Let me see if I can, that one video that crashed everything, let me see if I can, if this will. Because for me, it's really kind of the crux of what the potential is when you aren't thinking about necessarily pre-scripting everything, but if this can move, then that would be, well, I'll let it run and see if it'll move and move on to the next question. But I hear you, right? It's hard to give up. It's hard to give up, and it's hard to trust. And honestly, the systems aren't there yet for us to truly be able to trust it, which is why I'm like, 1 foot in each world, right? Let's use what this is working really well over here, but we're still human, and like, let's keep that connection as well. But yeah, yes.
Hi, I'm actually pretty excited about what you're talking about. I've been thinking a lot of storytelling in that language and thinking a lot about vocabulary and how we define words. And I want to ask, in this sphere mentality that you're talking about, what does dynamic narrative look like? And what are ways that you've solved that problem, or ways that you've looked at a dynamic narrative?
Yes. I wish this would play because it would show you exactly what I think it looks like. Again, I view it as kind of like seeing the Matrix, where you have these different story elements and parts that we've put into place that are the rules of the world, but the system itself is navigating between the people that are interacting with the space and with the story components, but with a knowledge base that says, okay, pacing and certain act structures. I mean, the 3-act structure, the 5-act structure, like that works because of human psychology. Like, they have researched it. It's not like something brilliant, like somebody's like 3-act structure, let's do it. It's like when you go back and say, okay, how does the brain work, and how does the brain work responsively to, oh, it's all good. Oh no, it's all good. I hope something awesome came up. Oh, please tell me, what was it? Am I gonna get so busted by Refinery29? Shoot, you guys, we're all friends here, right? But I think that like that to me goes to like where everything's gonna like come together in a dynamic, responsive environment. So, yes.
Part of my question is like a clarifying thing. So
Yeah.
that I'm understanding this correctly. Is this dynamic structure, we could truly go anywhere, that this AI can take whatever I'm giving it and then go wherever? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, again, AI, it still is a set of rules, right? It only knows a certain amount of data that comes in, and it can only respond to that if it's programmed to respond to that and to react in certain ways to it. So again, it's like, that's really complex. So is the world like our oyster? Is anything possible? No, not now, maybe not for a very, very long time, but there are elements of it, again, that can function now as generative, I guess would be the way to think about it. Like, instead of it being, all right, so this input comes in and I can go left or right, it's like, okay, if I'm collecting this data, here's a new answer that hasn't been pre-programmed that might take us in another direction, So.
Is it important that as the audience member, the user, the player, whatever you call it in your context, actually does that, or that I at least have the feeling of that appearance that anything could happen, and that actually the whole narrative is scripted, is the 5-act structure, if you will. I just can't see it.
Right. There was, a couple years ago at SIGGRAPH, there were 2 very different research projects. One where it was done by CMU, it was called Injustice, and you would go and you could make decisions on like how you respond to police injustice, police brutality injustice, right? And your choices were very clear. And then there was another project, I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it was the same thing, except it didn't tell you, right? You didn't know if you looked one direction that it was actually changing the storyline, right? It was built in to the environment. So I think like on a theoretical level, like I think it's fascinating to go, okay, there were people that wanted to know that their choices had action. There were other people that were disappointed to find out that that they had made a choice and they would have done something different if they knew that the world was responding to them. So you can go either way, sure. I mean, it's still the craft of narrative, like what's the experience that you're going through. But I mean, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong, or like it has to be one way or the other, honestly. I think that everything's a spectrum. So, Yeah. Oh, hi, yes.
What are the types of inputs that you're thinking about that are kind of exciting to you in these sort of spaces? You know, typically it's like voice, facial expression, sort of like point of attention. But like,
Right.
what are some of the things that you're excited about?
So the question's about what type of inputs are exciting. So there's a couple different levels of that. So I think definitely the research I was leading at Yale University on embodied navigation is super important to me because we have this barrier to entry of the technology being accessible for anybody, right? Like if somebody has to tell you 5 minutes of instructions on how to navigate in the world, like we're doing something wrong, right? It's going back to that Palm Pilot days, yeah, Palm Pilot, right? You had to learn the fake, like the hieroglyphics in order to, nobody wanted to do that. But the minute that you could touch it and it was instinctive, then it became, more like consumer friendly. So I think like that input, like whether it's voice or whether it's haptics, I mean, everything we built back in the 90s had specialized haptics. Like there were no joysticks that were sold by the thousands that you had to make button A or button B work for a certain input. Like getting that haptic solution, I think is gonna be a huge step. But I mean, as far as like visualization, I'm really excited about mixed reality, about that, of the layering, of still being able to see the real world and layering in digital assets. I'm super excited about volumetric. I think that's got a lot of potential as far as developing characters and responsive characters. So, those are some of the ones I'm most excited about, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Your talk makes me very depressed.
Oh, no.
But in a good way. Is it possible that the end of storytelling is also the end of us?
Oh.
But I want you to answer that from really your psychological background. That if we're moving from the linear and static to dynamic, and our brain has not been shown to cope with the dynamic, you may really be predicting something about what the technology is going to do to us. And I thought if you can expand on that.
Totally. Imagine that we are in a parlor in France in circa, 1895 or so. And we live in a world where there are paintings on the wall. Those paintings do not move, right? They don't move. And you go in and you go down and these Lumiere guys are showing these moving pictures and you walk in. But imagine that you walked in and Age of Ultron was playing and it's 1876 and things are blowing up and you're like, what? This is crazy. Like, I think to answer your question, we're still human and technology advances successfully at the rate that the humans advance with it. And that is a process of evolution in and of itself. So when you look at how technologies are integrated and how they're moving forward, there are generally multiple stages of integration, right? Initially, there's like a demonstration phase with, hey, this works. And you see, oh, we can capture the hoofs off the ground as they're running along. And we can, oh wait, we string those together and it's a moving image. And oh wait, we cut that and we can start, like it's a progression and it's an evolution. So I wouldn't think of it as much as a depressing, like the end of where we are now, but an evolution of where we will go based on how we're thinking about it, which is why the mindset is so important and how we're approaching it. Is that kind of answer? Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you view accessibility in producing narrative and how you envision we can, everyone can have a pen and paper.
Yeah.
Not everyone can build their own AI.
Right. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that and how you view how you think that's going to be possible, or if you think it's going to be possible?
Totally. Yes. I would say Accessibility. I truthfully, honestly find that accessibility was kind of like the first computer science class that I took, which I failed miserably. I was terrified of it. And I think there's a tendency for like traditional storytellers to be like, that's tech. But it's kind of complex, and I don't know the language, and they speak a whole nother language, and maybe I won't have that conversation. I think one of the greatest things we can do for accessibility is to be available. So if you're working in computer science, if you don't know people that are on the tech side, or if you are on the tech side and you're an engineer and you're looking for, okay, a more narrative-based person, like reach out and have the conversation. I know both sides of those worlds are desperately trying to find people to work together. Now, like the practical side of application, like how do you actually get together and code something that's going to change the world, right? Or change narrative. I find that it's part of the reason I still stay one foot in academia, because there are great organizations and companies that are supporting research in academia, which aren't required to have some of the goal settings and the bottom lines that we've got to have in the corporate world. And academia is a great resource for, hey, what are you working on? What are they doing over at Yale? What are they doing at Carnegie Mellon? What's Stanford up to? Like just checking up and seeing what people are researching on, and looking at the papers, whether it's at SIG-Chi or SIG-RAF, see who's working on stuff that's similar, and their emails are right there on the papers. Like, shoot them an email, hey, what happened with that project that you were working on? I think it might work with this. They might not have the funding to continue working on it anymore, but they might be able to put you in touch with other people that can. So, all right, one last question. Anyone want to ask the one last question? I'll give you a free copy of the book. Okay. Woo!
Thank you. I'm not sure what the question is, but I know, that's already a joke.
Okay, we've already...
Maybe I felt the book coming. But maybe like if you could talk a little bit more about, for example, like 29 Rooms and Instagram, like it plays a huge role in the development of that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it makes the experience be like through the screen and not directly like art person, but art screen person.
Right.
I don't know, can you talk a little bit about that, of like Insta-friendly,
totally.
the design, without like compromising the experience?
Yes, yes. One of the reasons I went over to Refinery29 is really this, like, knowing that the research and the work is so important, but without an audience and without people that are going to share that work, and brands or teammates that are going, I consider them our teammates in it, that are going to fund it, then it's just another kind of collapsing, like we're doing it because we believe in it, but we aren't reaching new people. We aren't really creating a new experience. So for me, taking that lens and taking that step back and going, all right, so I've been thinking about, okay, yes, got you. Like I've been thinking about this conceptually, but how do we actually reach audiences? And that's where people are right now. They're on their phones. It's one of the reasons AR, you're seeing a lot of momentum in AR as opposed to VR. And like it's that accessibility, because in order for brands to provide the funding, they need to see a return for the most part in what they're investing in. So you just start thinking about it instead of going, okay, here's a really cool way of looking at this and something that I think is going to be important to the industry. It's like I switch my hat over and go, all right, so let's just go through the experience and making it screen-centric or making it visually engaging as much as passion projects on the side. It's just, I think it's a different hat, but it's important to be able to do to get to keep that industry moving forward. So, yeah. Sorry to run over. Sorry.
Oh, God, you're fine.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Fantastic.